I thoroughly enjoy teaching D-Min. I want to echo what he said. D-Min courses are different than MDiv or undergraduate because there's a quality of experience and education that raises the interaction to a whole new level. I remember when I first went to teach at Dallas, they put me on the D-Min committee because I'd come out of a pretty good-sized church as a pastor. And they were just getting ready to offer their very first D-Min course in October, and I was joining the faculty in September. I had no emotional involvement to what they had done in preparing their first D-Min course, but since I was going to be on the D-Min committee for the future, I thought, well, I better see what I can find out. So I went out on campus during the first week of October to do a little man-in-the-street interviewing, you know, and I saw a student who was in the very first D-Min course, and I recognized him. He and I had been students years earlier together on campus. I was a few years ahead of him, but his name was Lenny. And I said, hey, Lenny, how's the D-Min course? Yeah, I just want to get some information. And I'll never forget what he said. He said, oh, it's great. Now we know what questions to ask. And we know when we're not hearing the answer. And I thought, that's it. You guys don't snow us anymore like you used to. We have too much experience. And so that kind of action just raises it to a whole level. I'm absolutely convinced for a pastor, the doctor of ministry is absolutely the best advanced degree to go get. I make no bones about that. I have 2 PhDs, but if I were a pastor and wanting to, I wouldn't go the PhD route. If you're going to be a teacher, go the PhD route. If you're going to be a pastor, D-Min is without doubt the best route to go. So I've echoed that. Now, he told me he's going to ask me some bits.
Well, I get the lighter part of the introduction. What does it mean to walk piers?
Southern California has a huge coastline, and a pier juts out into the ocean a quarter of a mile. People fish off the pier. There's a restaurant at the end of the pier. And you walk out there and the ocean cascades around you, and you hear the seagulls, and you have lunch at a restaurant out in the... Hey, it's great. Got to move to California.
Okay. I'm going to ask you 2 questions about your preaching. I've heard you many times, and it's wonderful, but I'm sure you've done some bad ones.
Oh, of course.
What do you do then?
I cry. I'm not kidding you. One time I walked off a stage, and I almost wept. I just said, Lord, you deserve so much better than that. I'm just so sorry. And other times, it's not been quite that bad. Other times, I walk off, or later that afternoon, I say, Lord, you're going to have to make them want to come back next week. There's nothing I did today that would make them want to come back next week. So,
do you still urge preaching without notes?
Yes. Yes.
So should any of us who use notes stay?
Of course.
This is like when the guy hits the home run and wins the game. How did you feel? What's your nicest, best feeling after pastoring or preaching where you know it connects?
You know, I grew up in the Church of the Open Door. J. Varon McGee was the pastor. And I heard him once say from the pulpit somewhere, I have never preached the sermon I wanted to preach. So I don't know that I've ever felt like that hitting of a home run. The older I've gotten, the less concern I have for myself. I mean, I'm at a stage of life where I'm not trying to impress. I don't need another job. I didn't need an audience, and I'm glad of that because that means that I'm mostly concerned about, Lord, did I do you good and did I love your people? And if I feel like something like that happened within the sermon, I'm pretty good. I'm pretty happy.
You may refer to this. What's the hardest part of preparing a new sermon for you?
The hardest part is the manuscripting. I write it out for word. The study part is just fun. I mean, I just love to read and learn. I'll pull books off the shelf all day and read. And once I've done an awful lot of reading, the outline fairly well forms. And it's not too difficult to think about how does this connect with the people. And I'll come up with scenarios and examples and everything. But then the labor of sitting down and actually putting it into the computer where the language is what I feel is the best way to get it across. That process of manuscripting just takes 5-6 hours. And it's the good thing about it is once I get started on it, I get rolling. It's getting started that's the hard part. I'll find all kinds of things. I'll clip my fingernails. I'll ask my wife what she wants me to do. You know, I'll find anything to prevent sitting down at that computer. But once I get started on it, I can go for a good period of time and get it done. Yeah.
Thank you for your continuing wonderful ministry and your heart. I love. We all love what you do.
I got to tell you, I haven't seen Newt for two, 3 decades. I got to tell you, the first time I saw him, we had a student at Dallas that was part of his church and went on staff there and must have talked him into inviting me to come up to preach. He didn't know me from Adam.
I did so.
No,
I always said Donald Sunukjian and Haddon Robinson read everything they wrote. Go ahead.
I hadn't read it.
I did.
Anyway, so I fly into Akron, and I have, and who shows up to pick me at the airport? The senior pastor of the mega church. I think, what are you doing picking me up at the airport? Don't you have somebody on staff that does that kind of thing? And then he says, have you had dinner? I'll take you out to dinner. And I thought, Newt, go home. Be with your wife. Be with your family. You don't need another night out. I mean, I know what pastors are like at that level. You don't need I'll get my own dinner. And he kind of resisted, but I finally coaxed him into doing it. And then, but I was so impressed that he showed up to pick me up at the airport. And then on Sunday, I was going to preach on one of the passages. It was either the one where lay up your treasures in heaven, or it was the one on it is hard for a rich man to enter into kingdom. And I had a nice, clever introduction. But the first line of my sermon was, today I want to talk about money. And then I went into the clever part of the introduction. Well, we got multiple services over here at the Akron, okay? After the second service, when I had started this for the second time with, today I want to talk about money. In between the services, the pastor comes up to me and says, that first sentence, can you move it to about the 6th or 7th?
Did I really?
You really did. And I immediately thought, of course, I know that my message is not going to be a, browbeating kind of, but they don't know that. And they hear that line and they think, oh, no, what did Newt bring this guy in to do with us? Or something? So I thought, yeah, sure, Newt, I'll move it to the 2nd or 3rd.
I apologize.
No, it was just very wise and smart on your part to do that. When you first saw my name in print, you probably said to yourself, how does this guy say his name? Now that you look at me, you say, well, you're not Japanese. Sunukjian is an Armenian name. Whenever you see I-A-N at the end of a name, I-A-N, that's an Armenian name. You used to have a coach out here, Araparsigian, Armenian, okay? Bogosian, Tamisian, Harimian, Katabsian, Matosian, Tamisian, relatives of mine, okay? We tried to forget about Kardashian and Kevorkian. If you just call me Don, that'll solve your problem and mine, and we won't have any problems. Just refer to me as Don. We're going to talk about principles of oral clarity. Okay? What do we do that enables a listener to track with us? There's an old joke. A guy came up to the pastor. Pastor, you're smarter than Einstein. Pastor, thank you, Bill. Okay. Later that week, pastor says to himself, hey, I'm not smarter than Einstein. Wonder what Bill meant. So next Sunday, hey, Bill, last week you said I was smarter than Einstein. What'd you mean? Pastor, I heard that Einstein was so smart, there were only 8 people who could understand him. Pastor, your preaching is like the peace of God. It passes understanding. Okay, now where does that humor come from? Okay, what gives rise to that sort of humor? Obviously, there is some underlying reality which has caused people to make those kinds of jokes. And the underlying reality is often our people do not understand. They do not track. They do not follow. And that's not usually because the pastor was sloppy in preparation or disorganized in the message. The pastor usually has done a faithful job of preparing a message, and in the pastor's mind there is a flow to it, and things hang together, and there is a unity. In the pastor's preparation and mind, it's there. It's clear. But something happens from the time that he has done the preparation and orally gives the message, that in the oral giving of the message, elements of unclarity creep in. And the reason for that is we lose a lot of built-in aids to clarity when something is written and we turn it into oral. When something is written, there are a lot of built-in aids to clarity that help the reader to understand. The biggest of these is paragraph indentations. When you read something, you have paragraph indentations. And that is a powerful, clarifying factor for you, because your brain says that when you see white space at the beginning of a bunch of lines, your brain says, white space, new concept, new thought. Your brain also knows that the first sentence after the white space is topic sentence, theme sentence. This is the big sentence that tells you what the entire paragraph is about. And your brain knows that after you get past that first sentence, the rest of the sentences are going to amplify that first sentence, develop it, expand on it. And your brain says, when I see this white space at the end of all of those lines, my brain says, end of that thought, get ready for another new thought. You have not read a word, and you have powerfully organized the material in your head. You take your manuscript with all of those wonderful paragraphs and indentations, and you go orally, and the listener does not see white space. They have no way of knowing when you move from one concept to a new one. They have no way of lifting out the biggest sentence, which is governing the next 2 minutes of what you're going to say. What is the equivalent of white space? A pause? No, they just think you forgot what you're going to say. There are other built-in aids to clarity, which are in the written form. If you read something and you didn't understand it, you read it again. I got students reading the same page 5 times to try to figure out what it says. Hey, you can't hear me again. You can't say, stop, go back 3 minutes, say everything you just said. Sermons don't work that way, okay? So you can't do that, all right? If I say the rain was long, rain. Now, if it's written, you know whether I'm talking R-A-I-N, that stuff that falls from the clouds, or whether I'm talking R-E-I-N, the thing that leads a horse, or whether I'm talking R-E-I-G-N, the ruler's term in the kingdom, reign. Written homonyms are no problem. Orally, homonyms are a problem. I could go on. There's a lot of built-in aids to clarity which are lost when we go oral. And a pastor, knowing perfectly what he has prepared or a teacher has prepared, assumes I'm being clear because there it is. So what we need to do is to put in some different skills of oral clarity. We're going to talk about 6 of them. And these are the ones we will cover as much as we have time for. If not, there's a very nice textbook that's been written somewhere that will probably discuss this stuff very thoroughly. And you can go on Amazon.com and get a copy of that wonderful textbook. You're all supposed to chuckle. Never mind. All right. But now the principles of oral clarity, not every one of them needs to be used in every message. Okay? Some messages don't require some of them. But all of them move in the direction of oral clarity. And when we have finished preparing our manuscript or written out our sermon, we need to check it against these principles. Put them on a 4x6 card and tape them to the side of the screen or put them under the glass top. And the first one says this, did I do that there? Yes, I did. Did I do it there? No, I didn't. And with a few computer strokes, 30 seconds, it'll be in there. Now, what's the second one? Did I do it there? It doesn't need to be done there. It doesn't apply. The most that these principles of oral clarity will add to your preparation is 5 or 6 minutes, because they are a checklist, and a few finger strokes of the keys will solve the problems. But they will make all the difference in the world in terms of how people track with us. So we're going to talk about the principle of clarity. This is very much back and forth. Ask a question. I'll be pointing at you. Pastor, I didn't mean to pick on you, but that's all right. I'll pick on somebody else. I'm an equal opportunity picker. So we'll be pointing around. And you all just feel free to stop, say, wait a minute, what about anything? And we'll go on through that. Okay, first principle of oral clarity. There are probably 10 or 15 sentences in your message which are absolutely critical. They are sentences which give content. Maybe they are your Roman numeral big hunk points. Maybe they are your previews or your reviews or your transitions. They either give content or they help the listener track the structure. They keep the listener with you and give the basic concepts. They are the big sentences in the message, 12 or 15 of them. Whenever you come to one of those sentences, the principle of oral clarity is this. You must immediately say that sentence again right away, but use different words. Before you go any further in the message, find other language to communicate the concept you just said. Find different terms that you immediately use to convey the same thought. Now, I just restated 3 times. I said, immediately say the same thing in different words. Right away, before you go any further in the message, find other language to communicate that. Use different terms to get across the concept you just said. I gave you 3 shots at the single concept that I was after. Orally restating is the equivalent of letting the ear hear it more than once when the eye cannot read it more than once. It is giving the listener's ear a chance to hear it, recognize it as a big concept, and gain the understanding of what the concept is. Restatement, okay? By restatement, I don't mean saying the exact same thing. By restatement, I don't mean saying the exact same thing. I'll call that repetition. By restatement, I mean finding different language to convey the same thought. Okay? Restatement is kind of like running in place. Okay? The message has been going, and you've hit a certain spot, and before you keep going, you kind of, everybody with me? You all got it? I'll give it to you one more time. Here's another time. Good. We're all together. Let's keep on going. That's restatement. That's coming to an intersection, and a light blinks, and it blinks again, and it blinks again, and then you're able to go. So that's what we're after. Now let's look at some examples. Take out the green sheet, which is attached to your package. You have 4 colored sheets at the end. You might get them free from the paper clip because we're going to constantly be looking at one of them side by side with the white notes. So look at the green sheet. The one that says no stones for a son. And on the screen I have the same thing that you have in front of you. If it's a little fuzzy or you can't quite get at it, and obviously it has, the sharpening of it has gone down. Come on. Okay. But I'll point to it and you'll see the same spot. Now, just to orient you to the message, it's the message where our Lord encourages us to pray. He says, ask, it'll be given to you. Seek, you'll find. Knock, the door will be opened. And then he repeats himself. He says, because everyone who asks receives. He who seeks finds. And to him who knocks, the door is open. And somebody says, I don't buy it. I prayed, I didn't get it. I asked, I didn't get it. So for the sake of that person and for all of us who'd like to be encouraged in our praying, let's turn there and look at that passage. And so we read the passage and we see the words that I just quoted. And then I give the take-home truth. In these verses, Jesus is saying, ask, and if it's a good thing, God will give it to you. Now that is a critical sentence. That's the message in a nutshell. I will restate that sentence, and it will sound like this. Ask, and if it's good, God will give it to you. Ask if it's good for you to have. Your Father will say yes. Come like children, just knowing that they have a loving Father, asking for what they want, and trusting the Father's wisdom. to decide what he will give. You too, come like children to your Father. Ask. If it's good, God will say yes. Now, all I did was spin the wheels right there. I ran in place. I just took 4 or 5 sentences to say the same thing again and again. I restated. Now, I will continue to do restatement at certain spots. This becomes now the next sentence, what I would call a preview or an overview of the big hunks of the message. Okay? This now says, here's a map of how to listen to the rest of the message. And so I will say something like, this morning, in order to be encouraged in our praying, let's see who this is a promise to and what it is a promise of. And that's basically covering the big hunks that are going to come. This is a way of clearly telling the listener in advance, you can expect me to take up these topics in this order in the message. Now, this is a preview. I am organizing the message for them. I will restate it to give them more than one chance to lock onto it. And so the restatement will be something like, in order to be encouraged in our praying, let's see who this is a promise to and what it's a promise of. Let's see who Jesus is talking to and what he is saying to them. Who is it that can claim this promise? And what promise can they claim? So 3 times I gave you the twofold hunk. Do you notice I also use body movement? Okay, we'll get to that if we have time. That's the last of the 6 principles. Physical movement is an aid to oral clarity. And the physical movement also marked out who is he talking to and what is he saying to them. What is this a promise of? Who is this a promise to? And what is it a promise of? I've already said there's a 1 and there's a 2. Okay? And as I go into the message, my next movement will be, okay, first of all, and I'll lean the way that I just had my hand move, who is this a promise to? I'll restate. Who is Jesus talking to? Who is it that can claim this promise? And so now the listener says, I'm with you. Good. This is your first movement, all right? And then I will give the statement, which will be, first of all, this is a promise for those who are genuinely God's children. Okay? And I'll have to restate that point before I get into an explanation of it. This is a promise for those who belong to the family of God. This is the promise for those who, through faith in Jesus Christ, have become sons and daughters of God. Now I will take them to the verse to show them where I got that from and why it's in there. And then eventually I will come and say, now not only is this a promise for those who are God's children, but more specifically, it's a promise for those children who are trying to please the Father. Restate. So all of the big concepts, and usually they are the major outline points, they need to be said more than once. Okay? Let me see what else. Now, usually you have to think of these in advance. They don't pop into your head while you're up there talking. And so they are part of the manuscripting. And that's what I meant when I say you came to a big hunk concept. You say, restate. No, didn't. And so you type in 2 more sentences with different words. And now you know how to make that language emerge orally because you have pre-thought it, written it down, and it becomes part of your preparation of your message. Okay? Now, how do you come up with the language to do that restatement? Okay? If you get stuck, I'm on page 2, the way to come up with the restatements is to find the key words of your original statement and then mix and match synonyms, okay? For instance, look at the yellow sheet, which is honor your father and your mother. This is a message on the 5th of the 10 commandments. There's not a whole lot of information in the honor your father and your mother other than that your days may be long upon the land that God gives you. And so when I announced that I'm going to preach on the 5th commandment, honor your father and your mother, my first thought was a lot of them are out there saying, oh, good, I hope the kids are listening, or get the kids in here, or whatever. But this command was not primarily addressed to children. It was to a nation of adults gathered at the base of Mount Sinai that God said, honor your father and your mother. He was talking to the adults down there. We tend to think of it in terms of children because of Paul in the New Testament says, children, obey your parents, and then he quotes the command, honor your father and your mother. But what Paul is simply recognizing is that the word honor is kind of one of those broad umbrella type words, and what what shape it takes or what honor looks like depends on how old we are. And Paul is simply saying, when you are a child living in your home, honor shows itself as obedience. But you don't stay a child. A man leaves father and mother. A woman transfers her allegiance from her father to her husband. We no longer are under the requirement of being obedient to them. But the term honor still means something. Okay? And what the command most of all was looking at, though, was even the third stage of life. The third stage of life where we are now in the prime of life and our parents are in their latter years. Our parents are into their 70s and their 80s. And it's to a nation of adults that God was saying, honor your father and your mother. And he meant, and here comes the take-home truth, when your parents are aged, to honor means to support financially. Now that's what this message is going to be about. This message is going to demonstrate from the scriptures that that is what the command primarily means. And then the rest of the message is going to talk about how to put it into practice. But at this stage, I have given them the take-home truth, the central big idea. All right? That needs to be restated. Now, how do you come up with the restatements? Well, you go through the synonyms. When our parents, what are synonyms for parents? Mom and dad, those who raised you. All right, what are synonyms for aged? Sunset years of life, retired, no longer able to go out and add to their finances. The last golden years of their life together, whatever the synonyms are. All right, to support financially, what are some synonyms for that? Assist economically. Make sure that they lack for nothing in the way of housing and medicine and food, etc. Whatever the synonyms are. Get a list of synonyms for all of those and then just shuffle the deck, mix and match. Okay? When our parents are aged, to honor is to support financially. When they're in the sunset years of life and they cannot add anything to the income, the way we honor them is by making sure that they lack for nothing in their latter years of a comfortable life. We honor our parents in the sunset golden years of life by standing ready to assist them economically with whatever need they have. More than anything else, the commandment to honor your parents means support them financially in their latter years, if necessary. Now I'm ready to move on. The listener has the concept. They don't buy it, but they have it. Okay? They wonder where I got it from. They're saying, you preachers find money everywhere. Okay? So I'm going to go on. I'm going to give them, I should have put it on the outline, but there should be a number 7 here, which will say, let me pre-organize the message for you. I mean, I don't say that. I say something like this. This morning, first of all, I want to look at a couple of scriptures, which will show us that's what the command means. We'll turn to two, I'm going to restate. We'll turn to 2 passages, and we will see the word honor occurring in those passages, and we will discover that it's used in a financial meaning regarding our elderly parents. And from the 2 scriptures that we're going to look at, we will see that to honor more than anything else meant honor financially, support financially. And then after we've looked at a couple of scriptures, then I want to, notice what's happening. My body movement has moved over this way. I went first, we're going to do this. Then after that, now a body movement, a little bit of oral clarity through body movement. Then after that, I want to suggest 3 practical steps we can take to put it into practice. Restate. What concrete actions will enable us to follow through on it? What can we do so that when the time comes, if our parents have the need, we're sufficiently able to do something about it? Restate, restate, restate. And so now the listener is clear. Oh, okay, this message is going to look at 2 passages, and then it's going to talk about some very concrete steps on it. And through a lot of restatement, the listener is ready to move on ahead with me. Okay? Now, you try it. 1 Corinthians 10:13 says, God will not put you in any situation that is more than you can handle. To quote the verse, no testing, no temptation, no trial, no situation has come into your life, but such as is common to the human race, common to man. Others have faced it. Others have gone through it. And God is faithful. He's going to make a promise. He's going to make a statement that you can absolutely trust. He'll be faithful to it. You can count on him. He will not put you in a situation that is more than you can handle. There will always be a way of escape You will be able to put your hand in him, and you'll be able to walk with him through that situation without sinning and without being devastated by it. You will be able to bear up under it. No situation, no testing has come your way, but such is common to man, and God is faithful. He will not allow you to be tested beyond what you are able, but will always provide a way of escape so that you can bear under it. All right, boil it down to a single sentence. God will not put you in any situation that is more than you can handle. You just gave the listeners your take-home big idea. Now, how would you say that sentence 2 more times, only picking different words? Write it down. I'm going to call on you. All right, let's see what you got. Let me come over here. What do you got? God will not put you in any situation more than you can handle.
God will not let you face anything that is too difficult for you.
Good. Give me another one. Not yet?
That's all I got.
All right, come on. What do you got, Ron? Not yet? What do you got?
When things seem impossible, God gives us the possible.
All right. Give me another one.
God will not allow believers to be cornered into sin.
All right. Got another one?
There's no situation you face that will be too much.
That's terrific. Got one?
God won't ask you to carry a burden too heavy to carry.
Okay. Somewhere in there, all you need is 3 or 4 of those babies, okay? God will not allow you to face any situation that is more than you can handle. God will not put you in any situation that is beyond your ability. God's promise is he's only going to bring into your life what he knows you are capable for. The listener doesn't even realize you're restating. All they feel like is, oh, that's wonderful. You just kind of stressed it for me, and I just was so glad. See? That's restating. Now, what is the value of restating, okay? The value of restating is that, obviously, indicates to the listener, this was important. This is a biggie. This is one of my critical thoughts in this sentence, okay? So it tells the listener it's important, but it does more than that. The fact that you use different language gives the listener an additional way of understanding the concept that they might not have understood it from a single saying. If you say something just once, and even if you say the exact same words, if I didn't understand it the first time, repeating it doesn't help me. But rephrasing it gives me another shot. For example, if I say, that's a Lumagal sign. Yeah? Did you know that? That's a Lumagal sign. Lumagal, baby, that's a Lumagal sign. All right, now everybody's saying, man, he's sure hot on that being Lumagal, whatever Lumagal means. See, all I did was repeat. That's a Lumagal sign. Lumagal. That's a Lumagal sign. What if I restate it? Notice how not only that it's important and I'm hot on it, but also some sense of understanding comes. Okay? That's Lumagal. It's not plastic. It's Lumagal. Oh. It's not wood. It's Lumagal. It's not metal. It's Lumagal. Ah. Whatever Lumagal means, I now know it has to do with material. It has nothing to do with shape or the word on it or its purpose. Lumagal has to do with material. So restating it, giving different language, gave the listener a chance to understand the concept as well as to realize that it's important. And this way, clarity comes to the message. Now, don't ask me what Lumagal means. I made it up, okay? I had to have a made-up word that nobody would know in advance what it meant, so that was what I did, okay? Restatement is God's gift to oral communicators. I mean, it just really is. It's the thing, no matter what sermon I'm preaching, no matter what kind of a sermon, no matter what kind of biblical passage it's on, as the message unfolds and progresses, there are some sentences which I just have to say more than once. Questions about restatement?
If you're preaching like your standard explanation, illustration, application, messages, with a restatement in there, are you restating your major point, or are you restating your minor points within the explanation and application?
I'm for sure restating the major point. I might not be restating the explanation. It depends on what's in the explanation. Surely the application is usually a story or a scenario or a, for instance or something. So there's probably no restatement. The critical sentence is the major one, okay? And that'll be one of the 10 or 12 in the message. That for sure it needs to get to be restatement. Now, when I get through with that, I've got a transition. The transition becomes the point. Now, not only this, but also. It isn't simply that this is the case, but we are also to see that this is the case. And so now I've restated the transition, and I will restate the new point. So there was sentence number 2 that was critical, and here's sentence number 3 that's critical. Good question.
On the restatement, should it be more concrete? Like, could you say, no physical trial beyond God's reach, no emotional?
That's
should
possible.
We get a more specific example, or should we be a little more general?
Good question. He's talking about should the restatements be more specific, or should they remain at a level of principle or at a sort of general level? And the answer is either, whatever works, whatever fits that particular message, as long as the listener has more than one chance. If you use physical, then you want to make sure they don't see that's the only one. So it was very good how you went on to say no emotional. And that way they realize, okay, you're just saying the same thing, which is the broad spectrum of trials. Yeah, that was very, very well done. Okay, first principle of oral clarity: restate, restate, restate. And I can still remember one student. When we provided them with a video of their preaching, and they had to put on headphones. This was back before they could slip a DVD into a computer and just hear it coming out. When they preached, we always were able to make voiceover comments onto their video or onto their disc. We still can do that from a soundproof booth. And so I'm in the back and I'm listening and I'm making comments onto the video. And he wrote back years later in his pastorate, he says, "Why is it whenever I preach, I hear you in my head saying, restate, restate, restate?" So I thought, okay, good. I'm glad the echo is still there on that. All right. Okay, second principle of oral clarity. When you start your message in the introduction, you are naturally led, because of the content and the theme, to begin to use certain words that start conveying that theme. Whatever language or phrasing you use in the introduction, the oral clarity principle is you must continue to rain those phrases down through the rest of the message. Okay? Restate. Whatever terminology is used in the introduction must also be used when you come to the background and when you come to the preview and when you come to the first Roman numeral, because it is the consistency of key language that the ear hears which ties the thing together. Okay? Now, let's look at some examples. Take out the blue one. This message comes from when Pharaoh finally capitulates at the end of the 10 plagues, and he says to Moses, "Get out, leave, go!" And Israel exits from Egypt. Now the passage goes on to say, and I'll just have to draw a little map here. Okay, there's the Nile Delta. Here is Dead Sea, Sea of Galilee. Egypt rendezvous in the land of Goshen, where they have been slaves for 400 years. Okay? They are now going to leave, and they are going to go to the land that God has promised them. That's right here. Promised land, destination. Point A, point B. There is an international trade route that will get them there in 8 days. A nice straight line, a direct route. But the scripture tells us in Exodus 13, verse 17, God did not lead them on that route. Instead, God took them south, where they encountered the Red Sea. All right. Now I'm studying this, and you're at a point A. You want to get, you know you're going to get to a point B. That's not up for debate. Why does he take them on such an erratic, roundabout path? Well, verse 17 gives you the reason. Verse 17 says, God knew that if he took them on this path, they would see war. And he says, they'll turn back and go back to Egypt. They'll never make it. They'll never get there. Okay. Somehow, in the route that looks direct to the Israelites, God, in his wisdom, knows there is an obstacle that will prevent them from ever getting to point B. If God's going to get them to point B, it's not going to be a direct straight line. It's going to be a roundabout path that will get them in. Okay? And so God takes them down to the Sinai. God's going to do 3 things for them before he gets them into the land. 3 things that will make them successfully get into the land. The first thing is they are a nation of slaves with a very poor self-image. They've been beat down for 400 years. He's going to take them down to Sinai, and he's going to get on top of that mountain, and out of the cloud, he is going to thunder the best guidelines for living that any nation has ever heard. And they're going to say, what other people has a God speak such wisdom to them? And their self-image. He has formed us into a nation. He has committed himself. We are his sheep. We are the sheep of his pasture. We belong to him. Wow. Okay, so first of all, he will lift them up to an understanding of he, the creator of the universe, has uniquely chosen them to be his people. That's the first thing. The second thing he will teach them is they can count on him. Every day, man is going to show up. They're going to walk out of their tents the next morning. Did you come through again? Oh, yeah, there it is. He's going to do that for 40 years. Now, somewhere along the 28th year, they're going to get the idea he's pretty faithful. He's going to show up. Okay? The third thing that they need is they need to learn military skills. They've been a nation of slaves. They can't hack the Philistines. I mean, they have no social cohesion. They have no. Their organizational chart is Moses 2.5 million. Okay, that's it. All right. So God says we're going to develop some military skills, and the Scripture tells us that in the wilderness He teaches them the arts of warfare through skirmishes with Bedouin bandits before they faced organized armies. Now, when all of those things are in place, when Israel is able to get to point B, God will take them safely in. Okay, now, that's by way of orientation to the passage. Introduction-wise, I started out just having some fun with, early in geometry, we learned the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. If I'm at point A and I want to get to point B, straight line. Okay, true in geometry. But when you and I think about what God does with our life, we wonder if God doesn't think that the shortest distance between 2 points is a zigzag. And now I want to connect them to the message. So usually my introductions connect their experiences first before we move into the texts. Usually I want to raise some kind of an issue or a question or a difficulty or a need or a problem out of their experience, their lives, okay? And so I will say something like this. In our lives, we're at a point A, and we believe that God's destiny for us is a point B. Restate. Somehow the Spirit of God has told us that's God's plan for our life. Our dream, our sense of vision from the future that we believe that God has given us, and this is what He's taking us to, is here we are, but that's where God's going to take us. A to point B. And I just gave you 4 restatements because I want them to understand. I'm setting up something here, okay? But now I'll give some concrete examples. For instance, you're single. You believe God's plan is for you to be married someday. That's the Spirit of God has kind of put that thought within you. That, yes, God has somebody for me, and He is going to take me to that person, and we are going to get married. Now, you and I, the shortest distance between A, single, and B, married, goes something like this. Somebody shows up at church as a visitor one Sunday morning, and they're by themselves. And after the service, they find the little place where the rest of us singles gather after church and decide where we're going to go out to eat. And they join us, and we say to them, hey, you want to go out to eat with us? And, oh, yeah, they're very glad to do that. And so we went out to eat, and I sat right across the table from them. And good-looking, sharp, witty, funny, good jobs. Well, I hope they come back next week. Well, by golly, they do come back next week. And this time when the little circle decides where to go eat, the two of us say, why don't we let them go there and we'll go here for lunch? And we do. And just the two of us now are at lunch, and we have a wonderful time. I mean, what a great lunch. In fact, as we're out in the parking lot after that lunch, before we drive off in our cars to our different apartments, we make a date for Friday night. And we've had dates for every Friday night since then. We've made the obligatory visit to meet each other's parents. And now, Pastor Newt, Saturday, June the 3rd, put it on your calendar. Dum, dum, da-dum, dum, dum, da-dum. A nice, straight line. But if God is taking us there, He's on a very erratic path, because they're coming and going and coming and going, mostly going. Okay, all the single people are now connected with me, all right? Yeah. Why is it that I'm at point A and believe God's taking me to point B and I'm not making any progress? I'm going sideways or backwards. Now, I'll do something similar with, this is examples, I'll do something similar with somebody in an entry-level job. I'll do something similar with somebody who's starting a company, maybe a construction company. And I'll get to the point where I'll say, why is it that... Okay. Now, here comes my take-home truth. Today, I want us to see that sometimes with God, the shortest distance between 2 points is a zigzag. Restate. Sometimes in God's handling of our life, the only sure, safe way to get is to go on an alternate path. The direct line won't get us there. Now I'm ready to give my preview, okay? And here I'm going to mark off the 3 hunks. And I'm going to consistently use the language as I come to each of these points. Now, I'm going to do several things to keep them clear here. I'm going to give them this pre-organization of what they can expect me to take up. I'm going to restate each one of them. And I'm also going to use physical movement to count off the hunks. So it'll sound something like this. Today, I want us to see that God deliberately takes us on a zigzag path. Notice I'm over here because I'm moving that way. Okay? I want to see that God deliberately takes us. Restate. Knowingly, purposefully, intentionally, He takes us on an alternate path. I want us to see that this is deliberate on His part. Secondly, I want us to see why He does it. Restate. What's His reason? What's His purpose? Why go on such an alternate route? And then finally, because that can be discouraging to us when we don't seem to be making any progress, how does God keep us encouraged? Restate. How does He keep us sustained and persevering and in stamina, moving in the direction He wants? How does God encourage us so that we keep trusting and walking with Him? Okay? First of all, in order to see that God deliberately does it, now I'm back over here. Okay, now I've done several things. I'm going to now use the word deliberately, okay, because that's what I used up here. I'm going to use why does God do this, the reason why. How does He keep us encouraged? He keeps us encouraged by. So I've got a whole lot of clarity things working for me. I've got restatement working for me. I've got consistent key language working for me. I've got bodily movement all working together for me. Now notice, just in case we don't have time to get to the 6th principle today, which is the bodily movement. Notice that I started over here. We're going to see why. We're going to see that it's deliberate. We're going to see why. We're going to see how He keeps us encouraged. I did not start over here. I did not say we're going to see that it's deliberate, we're going to see why, and we're going to see how He keeps us encouraged. Why did I start over here? Because from the audience's standpoint, you count 1, 2, 3. You do not count 1, 2, 3. Okay? So physical movement, it's always thoughtfully done from the standpoint of how the listener sees it, not how the speaker sees it. Okay? And this shows up in a lot of places. Okay? It shows up when you say something like, if you think what God did for you in eternity past is something, wait till you see what he's going to do for you in eternity future. The future's not there, baby. The future's over there. Okay? Did you ever buy stock and get in low on the ground floor and just watch that arrow go up off the charts? Right? I mean, yeah, that's from my standpoint, yeah. That's like saying one summer, my wife and I, we had a station wagon, put the kids in it. We drove from Maine to California. Okay, see? So your physical moves are a great help, but you always want to make sure before you do them that you know that you're doing them from the standpoint of the listener. And most of the time, that means moving to your left. Counting moves to your left. Past, present, future moves to your left. Hunks of a message move to your left. And so whenever I'm speaking, if I fail to give pre-thought to it, and I'm up there panicking, which way do I go? I've taught myself to say, move left, dummy. And I call myself dummy, and I move left. And usually I come out okay. But anyway, that's the principle. Okay, what we're after here, though, is the consistent use of the same key phrases. And the words deliberately come out of this. Now, when I get to the transition, I will say, okay, we've seen that God deliberately does it. Then I will use the rhetorical questions. I will say, why does he do it? And get us into reason number 2, the reason why. Now, to show you how important, you look at that and you say, okay, I got it. To show you how important this is, let me work with it a little bit more. Okay? Here's the message. Now, I know you don't see it. I'll show it to you in a minute. You got to listen, because we're talking about oral clarity. You don't have eyes. All you got is ears. So all I got to work with are your ears. Okay, here it comes. In the comic strip Peanuts, there's a character who always has to have his security blanket. Who's that? Linus. Linus lives in an insecure world, and this blanket is his security. You and I, we live in an insecure world too. We want to have our security. As we look into the Old Testament and we read the Psalms, we also see that the psalmists, they also lived in an insecure world. They too desired to have security. And many of the psalmists would cry out in fear, and God would meet them. God would be there to answer them. Psalm 27, which we're going to look at today, is one of those psalms. It's written in one of those experiences. And as we examine Psalm 27, the first 3 verses, let's first see how the psalmist views God. And then let's see how his response is affected by his view. And you say, I was tracking you good for a while. And at a certain point it went. And you say to yourself, I lost you. And then you say to yourself, that's the way sermons are sometimes. No, it was not your fault. It was my fault. Here's what I did. In the comic strip Peanuts, he has to have his security blanket. We live in an insecure world. The psalmist lived in an insecure world. They desire to have security. Up till this point, you are following me beautifully, because the consistent key wording is occurring. Then I said, in many of the Psalms, the psalmist would cry out in fear. Wrong word. They don't cry out in fear. They cry out in their insecurity. And God is there not to answer them, to provide them security. This was a message a student gave, and it's a good message. He goes on to talk about how the Lord is our source of security, and because God is our source of security, we should be confident in the face of life's difficulties. Good. He picks the word up down here, but we lose it up here, and we lose it here. As we examine Psalm 1-23, let's not first look at how the psalmist views God. Let's see how the psalmist viewed God as his source of security. And then let's see what a difference this made in his life. Okay? This is just gobbledygook right here. This is what the student said. Let us see how his response is affected by his view. I said, what? Nobody talks that way. Come on, put it in English. Let's see what a difference it made in his life. All right? But that's the consistent key language. Failure to use it right in here had the listeners go, all right, let me give you another example. Hudson Taylor, missionary to China. Hudson Taylor gave up his Western dress. He gave up his hair. He gave up his rights, his personal identity. He dressed himself in the clothing styles of the culture. He grew the braid behind his back, shaved the forehead, gave up his hair, his personal identity, his Western identification. He gave up all of that for the sake of the gospel. What would motivate a person to give up his rights? I'll even restate that question. What would motivate us to give up our rights for the sake of our ministry? The answer is found in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Turn. In 1 Corinthians chapter 9, in the first two verses, the first thing we see is Paul's role as an apostle. What does that have to do with anything we've been talking about? See? Tracking the introduction really well, opening up the passage, and the first point of the passage sounds like it doesn't have anything to do with what you said. Now, the speaker is real clear, because the passage is going on to say, Paul will say, am I not an apostle? Do I not have the right to lead about a wife? Do I not have the right to be supported by you? I have given up these rights for the sake of the gospel. Right? So, Hudson Taylor gave up his rights. What would motivate us to give up our rights? Answer 1 Corinthians 9. First thing we see in verses 1 and 2, not Paul's role as an apostle. First thing we see in Corinthians 1 and 2 is that Paul as an apostle had rights. And the listener says, oh, good. We're still on the same subject. See? Now to the speaker, it was clear that obviously he's in the same theme. The listener only can go by the words that are out there. And it's the consistency of the key language that keeps the listener tracking. And so, the first thing we see in verses 1 and 2, we have rights. We do. Okay? This is not a lesson about Paul. This is a lesson of God speaking to us. Always, Roman numerals always lead with truth, not with history. They always lead with the timeless principle the Scripture is getting across, not with the historical statement of that principle. Okay? So the first thing we see, because the big question is not why should Paul give up his rights? The big question is why should you and I give up our rights? Paul is just going to give us the model for that. But the question remains, why should we give up our rights for the sake of our ministry? So the first thing we're going to acknowledge is, hey, we have rights. You do. You have rights. If you're in youth ministry and you've had an all-nighter lock-in, by golly, by 8 o'clock in the morning, that dad better show up to pick up those kids. The last thing you want is after 24 hours of screaming kids and too much pizza and everybody wired on Coke is to have to wait for him to show up at 11 o'clock after his golf game. And you're sitting on steps with one kid after the other 30 have gone home. You have a right. You have a right. As pastors, you have a right, after preaching Sunday morning and teaching on Sunday school and preaching Sunday night, you have a right not to get a call from a complainer at 9 o'clock at night. You have a right. We have rights. Okay? Notice how Paul says he had rights. As an apostle, as the spiritual father of the Corinthians. He identifies the rights he had. Okay, see, the word rights keeps working. And that way there's a consistency of key language. All right, one more. Judges 7 is the story of Gideon. He blows the trumpet, and 32,000 show up. They're going to go against the Midianites. And God says to him, Gideon, way too many. You know, when I give you guys the victory, every man of you is going to go home and brag to his wife. 37,000 of us, 120,000 of them, 1 to 4. I myself took out 6. Okay? I don't want anybody bragging about this. Okay, got to get rid of them. And so they whittle it down to 10,000. And, well, he says, hey, Gideon says, hey, any of you that are a little bit scared and you just do not be part of the battle, go home. We'll take a 10-minute break. If you want to go, leave. I'm out of here. Okay, so he's got 10,000 left. Still too many. Take him down to the brook. Send him down. Send your lieutenant down there, Barkif, and tell him to kind of watch who comes down there. And once Barkif is in place by that spring, send them down in groups of 50 or 100. And tell Barkif to notice which ones drink which way. Some of them are going to come up to that spring, that bubbling spring, and they're going to lean down and like dogs. Okay? Others of them are going to put their hand in and okay? Now, there's no spiritual significance, whoever did which way. Okay? Don't give me a spiritual reason why he got picked the ones he did. Okay? It's purely arbitrary. And he's just sorting it out. And when he gets all through, he identifies the ones, and the 300 come back, and they're dismissed. Now he's got 300. And God says to Gideon, Gideon, you look like you could use a little encouragement here. Gideon, I got 300. Of course I could use some encouragement. So he says, Gideon, go, you take Barkif with you, and you go down to the perimeter of the Midianite camp where they have guards patrolling the camp. And just hide yourself in a grove of trees or some bushes, and just listen. And so they get down there, and pretty soon some guards come around, and they stop. And I always want to say one of them offered the other one a smoke, but I'm not sure that we should do that in church. So one of them says, man, I had a bad dream last night. Bad dream. The other says, what? What was it? Now notice what I did. Bodily movement is creating a conversation. That's all you got to do. Okay? Bad dream. What was your dream? I dreamed that there was this giant tortilla that came rolling down the hill and hit. Well, it says there was a loaf, but that's King James. If you say loaf, they're going to see Wonder Bread rolling down the hill. No, in Israel it was a flat bread. It was a pita, okay? If you don't want to use tortilla, use pita bread or whatever it is, but you got to communicate, because they baked on flat beehive ovens, smashed it out bread. And it smothered the Midianite captain's tent. And the other guy says, oh, that is the barley farmer, Gideon, because it was a barley tortilla that came down. And we're done for. We're done for. And Gideon and his lieutenant, okay, that sounds good. Go ahead. And then God says to Gideon, I've been needing something down here anyway. Wait a minute. I've got this handy little pointer that I can use, and I haven't been using it. All right. God says to Gideon, okay, Gideon, here's how we're going to do it. You're going to give everybody a torch, a pine pit stick, glob of tar, pitch at the end of it. You're going to light that baby up, get it firing, but then you're going to put a crockery vase or jar over it so that it's not visible as light. It's kind of smoldering inside there. And you give everybody a trumpet. And you go and you perimeter the Midian camp. And at my signal, every one of those guys surrounding the camp, trumpets, bugles blare, the charge. Da-da-da-da-da-da! And then everybody smashes the crockery jar, and a sudden infusion of oxygen throws flames high into the air. And after the bugle sound, you say, for the Lord, and Gideon, charge! And the Midianites, who are in dead sleep, hear this bugle sound. Turn around. They are surrounded by who knows how many hundreds of men are in each one of these torch companies, and they're coming in, and they get up, and they're not wearing their battle insignia. And all of a sudden, they pick up their swords, and the camp is running pell-mell, and they don't know who's the enemy or not, and they suddenly fight, and Midianites kill each other. Gideon holds the light for them to do it. God says, that's what you're going to do, Gideon. Okay. All right. Now, sermon. Here it comes. Start off. We are going to face impossible situations. Example. Contemporary connection. Relevancy, for instance, all right? Always connect with the people so that they understand why I want to hear this message, okay? All right, key questions. How should we respond to these impossible situations? Good question, Pastor. You just talked about I'm being asked to care for an Alzheimer's parent. You just talked about we are anticipating a Down syndrome child. You just asked that I feel like my husband wants to go to seminary and we don't have any money. He's 45. How's he going to support us while we're in seminary? Whatever the impossible situation. I've given a list of 5, 6 impossible situations. All right? Did I hit a nerve? I just saw them look at each other on that. Okay. But if you do hit a nerve, that's when they start listening really well, really well. Okay. Okay, how should we respond to them? Now, the word respond to the listener is that's the kind of key operative word here, okay? That's the phrase that I'm kind of looking for the answers to fit, okay? I expect an answer that says I should respond by or I should respond with or something, but the word response is what I'm kind of looking for, okay? And so the speaker's first point is God often puts us in impossible situations in order to show us his power. What is that? Where's my response? There isn't one. Okay? There is no consistent language between the question and the first point. It's not raining down. The speaker continues. In these impossible situations may cause us to fear, but God will reassure us. Well, you know, the speaker is now following the text. God is whittling down him into an impossible number in order to make sure that they know that it is God's power, not their might. And Gideon has his fear, but God sends him down around the perimeter, and he hears 2 guards talking and is reassured. Oh, yeah, the text is emerging, but I'm now having to work hard as a listener to get back up to speed because this threw me off. I'm looking for responses, and I'm not hearing any. Okay? Now, the reason the speaker did that was because the speaker eventually is going to get to the point of, I ought to obey God, and if I do, he will give me the victory. How should we respond? We should respond with obedience. Okay, 20 minutes into the message, I finally got something that sounded like a response, but I have forgotten that response was what we started out with by then. Okay? So there are 2 ways to correct this, to bring a consistency between what the listener expects and what the message does. And the consistency has to be in the language. There has to be a key phrasing of some kind of consistency. One way is to turn these into responses. Okay? So we would turn them into responses with something like, how should we respond? You know, show us his power. We should look to God rather than ourselves. Okay? We should listen for God's reassuring voice. We should obey God. All right. Now there, the language is consistent because this is response. We should, do. All right? Okay. Now I'm clear. But this is not biblical. Now I have finessed the language into an arbitrary list of points. I have taken my cue from David Letterman rather than from the text. Okay? The biblical writers are not writing lists of imperatives. These statements accurately reflect what the text is doing. It's not telling me that I should listen for God's. It's telling me God will take the initiative to reassure me. It's telling me this is what God will do for purposes that are in his mind and his attention. It's not telling me to look to him rather than myself. It means I at the end. So this is not accurate biblically. And anytime you have a sermon which is a list of points, you ought to be real suspicious that you might have finessed the text for simplicity's sake to answer a single question with language that the listeners can track. It's an old form of sermon preparation. It's called the keyword interrogative form. Okay? Simplicity's sake. But moves it away from what is truly being said in the text. It's very easy for the listener to pick up. It's very clear. Pastors get very bored with it after a while. Pastors get very tired of same old message every week. Find one key word and pick out a question and organize a message around that question. And not only do they get bored about it, they also realize, I'm not being honest with the text. Okay? So, One way to correct this is to change these. A better way to correct it, change that. Okay? Instead of a single question, set up multiple questions. Today we're going to see why God puts us in impossible situations. The reason why he puts us. We're going to see what he'll do for us. He will reassure us. And then we will see how we should respond. Create 3 questions. And they mark out the units of the passage. And now every sentence is both biblical and connected to what the listener is expecting you to do as you move through a sequence of points. Okay? Consistent key language. Questions about that so far?
Narratives like that, sometimes hard to move over to today's life. You did it with illustrations. What are some cautions or ideas? The application of that isn't for fighting ISIS.
No. Yeah. Okay, good question. In Gideon's case, it's a question of, this is something that God has asked me to do. That's clear. I am scared spitless to do it. I don't feel like I don't see why I should be called on to do that. So can I think of situations in which that would be the case for my listeners? My listeners are not called to fight ISIS. Okay? They are called to do what I said. Raise Down syndrome children, care for Alzheimer's parents, give up the security of an IBM career in order to move to Indiana to go to Grace Seminary with 3 kids. Okay? Lord, we just can't do that kind of stuff. Okay? And so they have this sense of inability to do that. What other kind of situations would fit that? A teenager feeling like they need, God is calling them to move away for college 1,500 miles away, to leave Indiana and go to Biola. Okay, most teenagers want to go to college 100 miles away, okay? Far enough away that mom won't show up every day. But close enough that I can still get home on weekends to have her do my laundry, all right? So, but a teenager would have that, okay? Couples looking at adoption. Just feeling this is something God wants them to do, but they just don't, I don't know. Whatever situations I can find that they sense you're putting me in what I perceive to be practically an impossible situation. And so then I can carry the message, okay? If God is calling you to do this, God intends to show you his power in there. And some way, God will give you some kind of reassurance. And so it might be for the couple who is debating about adopting, it might be somebody at the church or something that says, oh, I can't imagine 2 people who would be better parents for that child than you, or something like that, whatever the reassurance is. Okay, now the concept of consistent key language not only works in terms of whatever you use in the introduction has to rain down. Also on page 3, the concept works internally within a message when you've got a list, okay? And I give you the example on page 3. If you've got a list, and sometimes you do have a list. Paul will have a list when he says the results of being filled with the Spirit are. Okay, talk to one another in the Holy Spirit, and he will talk about the results of that. Now, if you start off by saying, there are 3 results of being filled with the Spirit. First, we have joy. Listeners clear. The first result of being filled with the Spirit is joy. And you go on for 5 minutes to further explain that and give examples. Okay, 5 minutes have now passed since you gave the umbrella concept of results of being filled with the Spirit. 5 minutes since the listener heard the large concept which is governing the list. And then the listener hears you say 5 minutes later, second, we are grateful for what we have. And the listener says, second what? Speaker is clear. I mean, the speaker's got 3 paragraphs, first, second, third. Listeners don't see paragraphs. Listener can go back and say, what was the first? Oh, Listener can't go back. Reader can. Second, we are grateful for what we have. Second what? What's this list about, Pastor? I forgot. No. The second result of being filled with the Spirit is we are grateful for what we have. Restate. Not only do we experience our joy, but when the Spirit of God enters our life, we find ourselves overwhelmingly thankful to God for what He has done in our lives. Restate. Same key language, putting it into the list. And so that goes on to show that the rest of this page, okay? And if you want to take out the pink one, from Psalm 3, the introduction starts off with problems, setbacks, opposition. This was a student message. They're a real part of life, and he went on to give an experience from his college orals that he flunked, and he was just devastated by it, this problem, this setback. He just didn't recover from it for a long period of time. And then he went on to extend the issue more broadly to the listeners, saying, we all experience this in different ways, opposition in ministry, and these experiences just fill us with some kind of dread or anxiety or fear. The Bible tells us we should expect this, but we don't need to be devastated by it. And then here comes the real good question. How do we face opposition with confidence and courage? And it restates that. How can we encounter these setback experiences and not be thrown by them, but instead move through them with a sense of, we're okay, okay? Psalm 3 is going to give the answer of how to face opposition. He should probably have a preview in here. We're going to first look at David in such a situation. We're going to see him facing opposition. And then after we've seen what the nature of his opposition was, we'll discover how he was able to move from it, and we'll see how we are able to move through it too. So you want to give a map of saying, before I answer this question, I'm first going to do this. Always look at your introduction. An introduction leads the listener to expect something. In this case, the listener expects you to talk about how to face opposition. Is that what you're going to do when you turn to the passage? Well, not right away. Okay, you're not meeting the listener's expectation. And so the listener gets confused. They expect how to face it. You're not talking about how to face it. You're talking about an example of somebody who did face it. Okay? So what you need to do is to readjust the listener's expectation before you turn them to the passage. And so you just say, before we look at how to face opposition, let's first look at a time in David's life when he was undergoing some kind of an experience like that. And then the listener says, okay, before you answer the big question, you have a preliminary concept you're going to deal with. But my point now is key language, okay? How do we face it with courage and confidence? Now I've got a list, an A and a B. I must make sure that the same key language occurs in the list so that when I say first, I don't just say second. I say the second way to face opposition with courage is to do such and such. Okay? So it's the language that just ties the umbrella concept into the points of the list. The listener hears, oh yeah, that's what this list is about as we go through. Right? And then one other area in which key language shows up, and that's in the area, bottom of page 3. As you go paragraph by paragraph through your message, you ensure that the listener tracks with you if in the new paragraph, within the first couple of sentences, there is some word that comes down from the previous paragraph. There is some connection to a word toward the end of the previous paragraph into the new paragraph. That verbal connection from paragraph to paragraph is the tie, the link that keeps the paragraphs connected to each other. For example, and this was years ago during the Oklahoma bombing, okay? Years ago, a man named Timothy McVeigh pressed the button on a bomb that crushed a 9-story federal building, killed 19 children in a daycare center. killed another 147 who were working or visiting in the building. Now, I'm going to repeat, this was 5 years ago, even though I said it at the start. The reason I'm repeating that is I'm going to make a time-oriented statement here. 3 months from now, he will be put to death by chemical injection. Okay? So the 3 months from now connects to the 5 years earlier. Now, he will be put to death. All right? The next sentence picks up the word death. One woman who is glad that he's going to die is this grandmother who lost 2 children. I've got questions about the death penalty, but not in this case. Now, I pick up on questions. Other people do have questions. This is probably leading into a message on capital punishment. Okay? And so I'm connecting the paragraphs with consistent language as I'm hooking them together. Good preaching, clear preaching, it's a learnable skill. You're encountering the concepts for the first time and you're going, wow, I had never idea there was so much into it. This is a lot more complex or complicated than I thought. Yeah, sure, when you hear it for the first time. But if you adopt 6 principles of oral clarity, within a month of sermons, they're going to become second nature to you. And if you just keep checking them against your manuscripts, pretty soon you start doing it almost automatically. And it makes all the difference. Good preaching is a learnable skill. I tell the students, I'll give you 5% for your personality. I'll give you 5% for your charisma. But if you're just willing to work hard on the kinds of concepts that we're putting out here, you'll be a top-notch preacher that people will just wonderfully want to come hear. And so oral clarity is achieved by some of these simple principles of consistent language and restatement and tying paragraphs together. Questions about that?
When you script it out, do you actually italicize the words that you're bringing down as you're preparing?
He asked, do I
or
actually
circle
italicize it in my manuscript? Probably not. But I have deliberately chosen it so that I know when I get up to speak, it will be there. I could italicize it. The other thing I might do is that when I'm internalizing it, I'm going over the manuscript, getting it ready so that I can preach it without notes. I might, if it's not italicized, I might draw a circle around it. And that will help me to see. I use a red pen for either circling things or underlining something, or maybe putting, if I've got 4 examples, and I think, how am I going to remember those 4 examples? I've got 4 illustrations. The first illustration is about, when I was in high school. The second illustration is about an interstate, Then I will have an H for high school, an I for interstate. And if I can create some kind of a word or some kind of a hit it into the sky, I don't know, whatever I can do. So while I'm preaching up there, it's H-I-T-S, and then I can pick up. I just use a red pen sometimes for that kind of silly stuff. Yeah.
Couple questions. So you, because of your comment earlier about preaching with no notes, once you write out the manuscript, you basically memorize it?
Well, I don't like to use the word memorize. I like to use the word internalize. I go over it often enough that when I stand to speak, 80% of it comes back, not 100. And I settle for 80. That's pretty good. And I don't worry if I had 4 illustrations and I forgot one of them, they didn't know I had 4. In fact, 3 is 3 more than they usually get. Okay, so I just settle for it.
The other question, being that this is about oral communication, do you use PowerPoint at all, and if so, how?
Yes. The question is, do I use PowerPoint, and if so, how? I use PowerPoint, but not for outline purposes. I don't use it for fill in the blank. I don't use it for putting the concepts on the screen. I use it for a map. Here's a map of Palestine or whatever it is. Sometimes I will use it if there's a very critical word within the text that is a technical term or something, and I want to give them multiple definitions of it, just for there, and then it's gone. off the screen. I'll use it for diagrams. If the text in the New Testament makes a reference to the Old Testament, I might put the Old Testament text up there, passage, so that they don't have to scour their way to Haggai. Just there it is, and it's only up there for 2 or 3 minutes. I'm not doing a lengthy exposition, I'm just enough in there. So I use the PowerPoint for those points. I don't use it for fill in the blanks or outline kind of things.
Why do you not use it for that or concepts?
I'm glad you're asking me that follow-up question. Obviously, there are benefits to using it for PowerPoint. The same question could be asked about bulletin inserts. I never use bulletin inserts with fill in the blanks or anything like that. I never do that. Now, obviously there are benefits. There's no question about that. The major benefit of PowerPointing the outline or bulletin inserts, the major benefit is clarity. Clarity, okay? It makes it easier for the listeners to track with you, which is why we do it. I mean, we ought to be honest. That's the only reason we really can justify for doing it. If you say, no, I wanted to give them a bulletin insert so that they could have a permanent record, that they can file away. Well, that's not a justification. If you want them to have a permanent record, give them a manuscript copy. I mean, have Kinkos pick out, preach out, and on the way out they can pick up a manuscript. That's a better permanent record than some sketchy outline that they may have filled in incorrectly. So, no, that's not our reason. Okay, our only reason is we think it will keep them listening to us, tracking with us, more attentive, and I agree with that. That is the benefit. Now the question is, are there some disadvantages, which if I start weighing them against that benefit, do I feel they outweigh the benefit? And I know how to get that benefit without doing that. I get the benefit of clarity by these oral skills so that I'm not getting it through some visual means, okay? So I don't need that for clarity's sake. If you understand the oral concepts of oral clarity, you don't need that. But then that still leaves me the question, well, what are the disadvantages? What is the thing? And I see several disadvantages. You have to kind of weigh them because, you and your congregations have ways in which you value how sermons go. And so I'll just give you my thoughts, and you can weigh them and decide what you want to do on it, which you will anyway. But one disadvantage is it's a bit distracting for them. They're looking at you. They're also trying to find where they are in here. They're also looking up on there. And we have lost that sense of my heart pouring into your heart, doing business with God. It's kind of become a thing. Now, for a long time, we went to a church, and there was always an outline bulletin. My wife always filled it out, sitting next to me. And when she got home, threw it away. She did it. I refused to do it on principle. I refused to fill in what the pastor's given me. But even I was distracted by it. Why? How do I get distracted by it? Okay, here's the bulletin insert. Introduction, Roman numeral 1A, 1B over here. Okay, now, how am I distracted by it? I'm not even looking at this thing. 20 minutes into the message, I'm saying to myself, how far are we into this mess? What do I need to be thought? Or even worse. Gotcha. You had to have this to the secretary by Thursday. You were still working on your message on Friday and Saturday, and by the time you got through with it, it didn't come out like that. You're not doing what that says. Gotcha. Forget that. I don't need all that. Now, and I look at the people. Some of them kind of are paranoid about making sure they got everything done. I mean, fill in the blanks. If they miss it, they've got to get it down. They can't go home with a blank not filled in. Okay? And introduction, Roman numeral 1, fill in the blank, A, fill in the blank. Pastor's going to talk for 4 minutes on A, that we just filled in the blank. But as soon as I filled in the blank, while he starts his 4-minute explanation of A, all over the auditorium. Ready for B. Hey, I'll get there in 4 minutes from now. Well, I know, but I want to make sure I don't miss it. So I'm overstating it. I'm having fun up here. Okay. I guess the biggest concern I have, are we creating a culture within the church that this is a learning environment? This is an academic exercise. We are here to get biblical knowledge. Now, none of that is bad. That's not my goal. I want you to learn in order to respond to God's heart. You need the biblical knowledge in order that you can understand what it should show, how it should show up in your life. And my goal is not to teach you. My goal is to teach you how what it says connects with your experiences, and it's my life pouring into your life. I don't see Nathan going up to King David. David, I'll tell you a story. I got a rancher, thousands of sheep. Got a little neighbor next door, got a pet lamb, sleeps with it at night. Okay? I'll tell you a story. David, you might want to take some notes on this. David, what should we do to this guy? You ought to die. Yes. Okay. And somehow for me, that's why it's without notes. That's why it's without visuals. Now, I do props. I have props all the time. I can do any kind of a prop. But it's, but the thrust of the message is I will use oral clarity to keep you tracking with me. Because ultimately, as you track with me, then I'm able to say, are we doing business with God? And the fact that there are no notes means I'm not breaking eye contact, and you feel like, are you talking to me, or are you reading the inside of your forehead? No. And so I put the effort. After I've manuscripted, the honest truth is it takes 2-3 hours to go over it enough times until it gets internalized within me. I have made the decision God's people are worth it. It is an extra investment on my time, but it is to their benefit because it enables me to have a directness. You would not go to a drama play where the actors were walking around with, no, Harriet, I don't think huh? You'd never go to a drama play where the actors are looking at notes while they're doing it. We wouldn't do that. Okay. Now I know that they've had enough rehearsals they've memorized their lines. Okay. I can't memorize it, but I can internalize it. And if the unbelievers can put that much effort to entertain, then I've made a commitment to God that I'll put in the time to internalize it. And I do. The other benefit of internalizing it is when you go over it out loud, if you mutter it out loud to yourself, you suddenly discover, my lips don't say, we don't talk that way. Okay? How his response is affected by his view. If you go over it out loud, you realize, what in the world am I saying there? And so you start changing the language to make it more conversational, more natural. You cross out a line and you put in a better way to say it, or you move this to the end. The thing about Timothy McVeigh, is it still here? When I first wrote it, Timothy McVeigh pressed a button on a bomb that crushed a 9-story federal building. That's how I first wrote it. And when I was practicing it, I came to a pause after the word bomb, and it suddenly made me realize I need to repeat the word bomb. That was more effective. He pressed a button on a bomb that crushed a 9-story building and killed 19 children. And there was just the repetition of the word bomb. It wasn't there when I first typed it out, but muttering it and doing it, repeat the word bomb. And all kinds of little things like that show up into the manuscript, which make it more naturally, I often tell the students, hey, how would you say that if you were talking to a 13-year-old in the church parking lot? How would you just say what you said? Okay, say it that way to us. That's the language that we move in. Get away from the language of commentaries or church jargon. How would you communicate to a 13-year-old in the church parking lot? And I find that having manuscripted and trying to internalize it, I discover those places where I need to make the language also more. But the big reason for doing it is to be able to have that immediate directness to the listeners. All right, one more before we break for lunch. Number 3 is fairly short. We can do it. Use rhetorical questions. A rhetorical question is where the speaker asks a question, does not expect the listener to shout out an answer. Okay? Sometimes they will, but not too often. Okay. Use rhetorical questions as a means of transitioning from one concept to another when you are advancing the progression of the message. A question is a good way to do that. For example, look at the blue one again, the shortest distance between 2 points. Having established the 3 questions in my preview overview map, I will use that question to transition into the point. Okay, we've seen that God deliberately takes us on a zigzag path. Now, why would he do that? Restate. What would be his reason? What's his purpose in doing that? Well, the reason why God sometimes says, now having asked the question, the next point is the answer. Now, the reason a rhetorical question is a good oral clarity issue is this. If the listener somehow got lost here, their kid needed another lifesaver or something, I don't know what, and they just kind of fogged out on you. When they hear you ask a question and repeat that question and restate that question, they say to themselves, okay, thank you. I wasn't sure where we've been, but I bet for the next 4 minutes you're going to answer that question, aren't you? The answer is yes. I asked it, so I'm going to answer it. So it immediately gives them a way of picking you up again, connecting with you again, because now they know I'm back on track. You gave a question. I'm going to look for the answer. And so rhetorical questions are a good way for that to happen. The same thing would be true in honor your father and your mother. This is the yellow one. I've already said I should have had a previewed point number 7. We're going to look at 2 passages, a couple of passages, which will show us. And these are the passages. I will probably spend 10 minutes in each of these passages. The Matthew 15 passage is the Corban passage, where a man says, you tell me that whatever I could have done to honor my father financially in his latter years, the temple will not release my gift. And I have to go back to my father and say to him, Dad, I don't have anything to help you with because a previous pledge I made to the temple, they're holding me accountable for it and I can't get it back to give it to you. And out of this principle, it's amazing. God's commandment to honor our parents comes way ahead of giving to the temple, to the Lord's work. Now, I'm not going to let them off the hook and tell them they can't do both, but if they've got hey, if your parent is in a round-the-clock intensive care unit at the latter stages of life and it's costing you $6,000 a month to put them there, then God bless you. If I'm your pastor, when they die, you'll start giving to the church again. But right now, God, first of all, wants you to see to their needs. That's clear. Jesus said, God's command was, but through your tradition of Corban, you have prevented a man from honoring father and mother. This is the passage where Paul says to Timothy, you have certain elderly women in the church that the church needs to support. These are women who have no relatives living to help them out. But, he says, if a widow has children or grandchildren, let them first return to their parents. And he introduced that with, there are certain widows in the church that you need to honor. There's the word. Honor is a financial word in the biblical world. And so he says that they should do that. Let me see. Anyway, having said, I'm going to look at a couple of passages of Scripture, and then I'm going to talk about some ways we can put it into practice. After 20 minutes of looking at the passages of Scripture, I now come to a transition, and I will use the rhetorical questions. I will say, if you and I have a heart to do this, how can we put it into practice? If you and I listen to this, restating the transition, and we say, I've always sensed that that was what should be done, they maybe didn't know that the Bible was quite that explicit about it, what concrete steps can we take to put it into practice? What specific actions can we follow through on? Okay? And through a transition of rhetorical questions, restating the rhetorical questions, using the same language down here that I used up here, the listener says, you're coming to your second great movement within the text. And I will also use physical movement. It will, if this is what we have a heart to do, how can we put it into practice? And so we'll do it that way. Okay? Questions?
Wouldn't you want to use the one about pastor who teaches well is worthy of double honor? Is that the same word?
Absolutely. But we're talking about parents. Hey, you preach this message. A lot of parents in your church are going to want a copy of the tape to send their kids. Hey, you're free to preach any of these. Okay, you're free to preach any message that you hear. Those books that you have are messages preached to a congregation and carrying it through the books of the Bible or the life of Jacob. You're free to preach any of those messages. That's what they are. They really are messages. You don't have to give me credit. You don't have to mention my name. I don't care. They're yours. Okay? The only thing you have to do, if you ever invite me to preach in your church, tell me which of my messages you preached. I once heard Dr. J. Vernon McGee. I grew up in the Church of the Open Door. And I once heard him telling to the congregation of the Church of the Open Door about how in his early years pastoring, before he became pastor of the Church of the Open Door, he pastored a Presbyterian church in Pasadena, which is about half an hour north of the Church of the Open Door in Los Angeles. And in his early years as a young pastor, he invited the president of Dallas Seminary, where McGee had gone to school, whose name was Lewis Perry Chafer. He had invited Lewis Perry Chafer to come and preach at his church in Pasadena. And as McGee told the story, he said, Chafer said to me, "Vernon, what should I preach on?" And McGee said, I said to him, "Dr. Chafer, you can preach on anything you want, but don't use your Job sermon. They'll think you got it from me." So you can preach it and pray that nobody ever goes online to see whether somebody else preached it before you. Okay. All right. Who can give us? Yes, ma'am.
In a different oral communications thing, more directed, obviously not for a preacher, but in communicating in speeches and things, they followed where, like, you do the intro and then the visualization and then try to fit a need and an action. Can this stuff be transferred to anything?
Absolutely. I've had people in the medical industry who put on medical seminars utilize the skills of oral clarity.
Do you know the outline that I'm speaking of that follows that?
Usually I would have put those elements in a little bit of a different order than the one you put them in. But I'm not sure. Yeah. Yeah.
But
there are a lot of, like there's a Monroe motivated sequence. Monroe was a speech. That's it? Yeah. Okay, the Monroe motivated sequence, you start off with a need or something. I don't know, I have to go back and do it. I'm not talking, our communication biblically differs from normal speech giving in two important ways. Aristotle, who was an early theorist, he had what he called the 5 units, or the 5 subjects that you need to address when you're going to give a speech. First of all, you have to discover your content. You have to think of what you're going to say. You have to come up with whatever your arguments or your supports are. Second, you have to come up with the organization, what structure you will use, what sequence you will do to do that. And then he had some others which had to do with how will you illustrate or convince or something like that. You and I never deal with these in biblical preaching. We already have our content. It's there. And it's usually in a flow of thought that we are going to follow. So we don't do that, okay? So in that sense, Monroe's motivated sequence is for the president if he's going to give a State of the Union address, or if it's, for something like that, or a CEO who wants to rally the troops of the company. Now, within their structure, these principles of oral clarity also fit, okay? Any CEO should restate, okay, He should use consistent language in order for the people to track his report on the company's progress last year. And so that's why people who are in the medical field who give medical presentations say, yeah, these principles of oral clarity are universal in terms of oral communication. They are not uniquely connected to biblical topics. I am using biblical topics to illustrate them.